everybody. I'm Mike Pizzard, and welcome to the latest edition of the Techstrong Gang. We're going to be talking about this TicketMaster debacle involving Snowflake, and then we're going to move on to, well, some insecurity that results from some of the work that the FBI is doing. And I know that's a little counterintuitive, but we'll get into it. And finally, we're going to look at, well, Fortinet acquired Lacework. We're going to see what's going on with CNAPs. We'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, and we're back. This edition of the gang has Chris Blask, who is north of the border. Chris, where are you?
In lovely Binbrook, Ontario, Canada.
Excellent. And then we have our globe-trotting Mitch Ashley is actually back in Colorado for a change. How you doing, Mitch?
Good. Good to be home for 2 hours before I head out again. It's a little longer than that, but it's going to be a short stop.
There you go. All right. Our first topic today is this whole thing that went on with TicketMaster was the initial breach involving Snowflake, and some of that stuff sits up on Amazon Web Services. And then researchers at Mandiant seem to report that, well, a lot of people are having the same issue and it's just starting to expand. And it's kind of like watching a slow moving traffic accident. But Chris, what's your take on what's going on here?
Yeah, we're talking about Snowflake now, right? And I just have to say, I try to give a positive message and a positive outlook. I think that's true most of the time and worth keeping in mind. However, we do make the same mistake time and time again. And the first mistake is not taking responsibility. I'm not an expert on this individual topic. Folks at Snowflake may take exception to this, but own it. Even implying that, we're going to help our customers fix their problems. Don't ever say it that way.
Mitchell, what do you think? I mean, a lot of this comes down to this shared responsibility model. And I got to say, I'm a little skeptical of the whole thing, but what's your take here on, is this working?
Well, I'm kind of a skeptic. I don't know if skeptic's the right word, of shared responsibility model. It's true. You're depending upon a provider like Snowflake to have a secure environment, to secure your data, et cetera. But ultimately, it all comes back to you. Shared security model means you're still 100% responsible for whatever happens as the end user. Now, to Chris's point, I absolutely agree. It's just don't fob it off on the customer. Bad customers. They're not securing their accounts. Well, maybe you ought to help them a little bit. Best practices. I'll bet there isn't a security professional in the world that wouldn't say, hey, at least enable multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication just as a start, because we all know passwords are free. And there's many of them available, and keys and everything else on the net. And so, at least to do some basic things to kind of say, we know it's a pain, but you should be used to it, because I'll bet you use two-factor on just about everything else you use in your environment. If you don't, we'll help you start. Here you go.
Yeah. And that's really well said. The shared responsibility model, contemporary topic. Like right now in the CISA supply chain working groups, we're looking at spinning up tiger teams, short-lived focus groups to work on things. And one that's really interesting is sort of sparked off by an FCC requirement request. Don't hold me on exactly how hard it is, but they want the ability for people to scan a QR code on a medical device, on an IoT device, and get the SBOM and the HBOM and these things. And without going into all the details of that activity, I think that's anything one to follow. I think this year some guidance will come out to help with that. But you are ultimately always responsible for your own security, and the shared responsibility model, we're getting there. Really work this out. Like, the reality is that most of you out there is working. Your vendors are good. Your suppliers are good. Your customers are good. You manage to figure it all out. We're all, as we said in the beginning, we're all in this together. Don't give or take, blame. Just work it all out. But, we're a long way from being able to actually see through our relationships in a fast enough cycle to use that information. So at the end of the day, yeah, Mitch, you're right. You're responsible for your own security.
I'm a simple guy, so help me understand this. If I leased you a car and I knew that you didn't know how to drive it, and now I'm going to charge you extra for services to help you to drive this car, am I not kind of setting up a failure by definition here? If I look at all these cloud service providers, every one of them seems to offer a value-added managed security service where they manage all this stuff on your behalf, I feel like a large percentage of that should just be baked into the actual original service, and that there's a little bit of a game being played. Or am I being too cynical on this, Mitch?
Well, I do think, service providers should set their customers up for success. You can't sign up for a Google account without two-factor authentication, at least pushed on you, if not required. And in this day and age, I think that is a responsibility that providers have. You just can't say. If they didn't have any responsibility, then there'd be no password formulation requirements. Yeah, enter password 123. Okay, it's all up to you. It's your job to worry about making sure you're secure. So, what's the difference between having password standards and requiring multi-factor authentication? Really, not much. In this day and age, I think a consumer might be a little put out about a two-factor. Still, even they're having to do it. They do it on their phones all the time, right? Enter some code or a biometric. And I think that should be a basic element of it. So I think there is a responsibility that as a service provider, especially when it's something as sensitive as your data. But our data is everywhere in the cloud. So at least that's my position. I don't know. Chris, am I off base? Or it seems to me this is pretty basic stuff.
No, and you said that well, but to Mike, to your question, I think you have a healthy cynicism in that. You can take that too far, but as long as you have teams, I have a healthy optimism. I tend to think the folks who are doing things right, we need to keep an eye on. And this is a good example because features get baked in. Windshield wipers, seat belts, air conditioning. So you can watch as an industry develops, and what are they charging extra for? That's not baked in yet. And yes, it all gets baked in eventually. So where a healthy cynicism comes in, because service providers can make a lot on the margin by selling those add-on services just a little bit longer or a little bit less or a little bit extra than they really should by now. Right? So I will save my commentary on any particular cloud providers in this case or anybody else, but we should all keep an eye on that. Some things should get baked in over time, and we shouldn't let momentum carry us too far past what should be default.
All right. So then my next logical conclusion is, Mitch, do we need Ralph Nader back here to write unsafe at any speed for cloud computing? Is that what's going on with this thing? It feels like, we're giving people access to these services and there's no brakes or seatbelts.
Well, then we'd need a Corsair of the cloud, right? For him to write the book about. The problem is there's too many choices to pick from. So none of them are safe at any speed. I don't, so I posted something and I don't know if I've got flamed yet, but, as much as we talk about security, and especially national security and security of our critical infrastructure, it's beside me that we don't have an equivalent of a Secretary of Defense, but Secretary of Cyber Defense for the nation. It is equally the battlefield of everything, right? And it's the subtle part of war. It's like it's the non-declared war that we do. So I think that's the book to write. Is like, where the heck is our cyber defense? It's there, but it's never above board because our news cycles are only about 2 hours long. So by the time we talk about the Snowflake breach, as soon as we're done watching Techstrong gang, something else has happened. And so we kind of forgot about Snowflake unless they pop back into the news. And so it's not top of mind of securing all of this because we're so used to, more data got stolen, more keys got stolen, more passwords got stolen, more personal information got stolen. Okay, 9:00, time for a second cup of coffee. I think we're just numb to it.
I think you're right. I was just having this conversation with some of the folks who write for Security Boulevard for us, and it's starting to turn into like the local crime blotter. I'm like, there's a breach every day now. Somebody's involved in something or other, to the point now where I was just asking the question, is this news anymore? Does anybody care if there's a breach? I mean, Chris, what's your sense? Have we just gotten to the point now where we're just inured to the whole thing?
Well, I'll sort of echo my last comments, right? There's, to be clear, it's all working. It's still running, decades and decades, now, and it generally works all the time. So it's not as bad as we might think. However, it is as creaky as it looks at the same time, right? There are massive risks, and we've avoided a lot of them by, not doing all the wrong things until it's too late, right? And you can't ever forget that. And to Mitch, to your point, I agree. I think there should be a secretary or cyber or something of that level. But in defense of, if it needs to be seen that way, or to explain, how we got here. Like, again, the U.S. federal government is the biggest, slowest entity in all of human history, but it gets there usually in the end. And Howard Schmidt, late great Howard Schmidt was sort of the first cyber czar. We had rules like that, when you get right down to exactly where that seat would be, who gets it, and where the authority comes from, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that can take a while to do, but yeah, I think we got a space force, which I don't really think is necessary, but it's a domain. I can understand the argument. A cyber force, focusing our efforts at in any nation, in the U.S. At that level on these issues, 100%. Yes.
Yeah, or who knows? Maybe the cloud service provider should get together and have a SWAT team put together to help customers go deal with these issues. And maybe it shouldn't be something I pay for. It should be a free service in the interest of national security.
Well, and that's perfectly reasonable suggestion. And things like that have happened in the industry. I've done that, in various hats. Sometimes you just say, look, we're Cisco, right? The turn of the century, Cisco had a huge position. We did all sorts of things because, they need to be done and nobody else is going to do it. And ironically, it makes people like you more, so you sell more products, you make more money anyways. So it's not a terrible idea. The government, again, is big and slow and stupid. God bless their pretty little hearts. But most of this stuff needs to be done by us in the private sector who can just choose to do so.
There you go. But, hopefully it won't be us taxpayers paying for that, because maybe we didn't set this issue up in the first place. Mitch, speaking of making money, it seems to me that lawyers are going to be making money off of this particular incident for years to come. I mean, let me get this straight. We can sue TicketMaster. We can sue all the other customers of Snowflake. We could sue Snowflake itself, and we could sue the cloud service providers because they all have some sort of quote unquote shared responsibility. So what are the financial implications of shared responsibility?
Well, so there's a cynical answer. Maybe it's cynical Friday. What day is it? This is Monday, cynical Monday. If the financial impact were significant enough, this would happen less. We would see it not grow as fast, the number of breaches. And I've said this for a long time. It's like, until there's really, think about it. If this was like SOC compliance, right, where the CEO had to sign off that the financials are accurate, and it's disclosing the right information. I'm not saying it's the CEO's job to sign off on security, but if you had something like that, I'll bet you a lot less breaches would occur because it would get a lot less scrutiny. I just came back from AWS Reinforce this week. It was really interesting to hear Chris Betts talk about their culture of security. They don't call it a security culture. They call it the culture of security. Not sure the difference, but the first thing he talked about is every Friday, their CEO of AWS sits down and talks through what the escalated security issues are in the organization. This is across all of AWS. Not saying he solves all those problems, but they have an escalation process that anyone can escalate a security issue. And, I'm sure sometimes it's budget, sometimes it's other factors, sometimes it's kind of holding people, feet to the fire, whatever it might be. At least that's what they claim. They do that every Friday. Well, okay, that tells me, it's pretty important then if the CEO is going to take their time to review and work through issues. Both are informed about what's going on, and people also know that it's important. So I think it's more than just a visual, that looks nice, it must be important there. I think they actually take it seriously like that.
I don't know. Here's the part that makes my head explode. So let's say that I was leasing you a car, and I leased you a car, and I knew perfectly well that you had no idea how to drive that car, and then you went out and caused all kinds of mayhem. So now I have a cloud service. And I am giving that to developers, and I let them provision that stuff and use that, knowing perfectly well that they have no idea how to drive that cloud platform securely. And then all these bad things happen. So I feel like we got to have a better way, Chris, but am I crazy or what?
You're right. You're talking about the future, right? And the quote is always Terry Pratchett. There's an acceptable level of nemesis, that we have to live with, and it's not only okay, but it's desirable in some way. You ask about, is this going to be, a lawyer's going to make a lot of money off this? Oh, yeah. Right, and they always will. And as long as enough, but not too many lawyers are making enough, but not too much money on these issues, it'll continue to push those levers that make the CEOs make the choices. Not as early as many of us would like them to, but more often than not, just barely not too late.
Mitch, last word.
If any idiot can buy a chainsaw, then anybody can buy a cloud service. How's that for a cynical Monday? That's what happens when you put me on the road too long, Mike.
All right. I think we all need to take some responsibility for this and stop passing it around to each other. And to Chris's earliest point, finger pointing may not be the most useful thing here, but it does seem to me at the very least that we're all not stepping up enough here. So that's the last word there. And we'll be back in a minute to talk about our next topic. All right, folks, and we're back, and we're going to talk about a little more insanity that goes on in the land of cybersecurity. But we have this, what sounds like a positive development. The FBI announced that they have somehow or other discovered 7,000 de-encryption keys that can be used from the Lockbit service, folks, and they're making those available. The problem seems to be that people are hesitant to call up and say, I would like those keys, because they may not have reported the fact that there was a crime in the first place. And so now they're kind of like, well, I don't want to get fined for not reporting the crime. So there's this kind of, damned if I do, damned if I don't feeling out there. Chris, do we need to kind of think about this a little bit, or is this just the fact of life that if you don't report the crime, you're going to do the time, as it were?
I don't know, honestly, right? So as I understand the story, the FBI has decided not to, they'll release those keys, but you have to ask, as opposed to just posting on the site, so anybody can anonymously go and grab them and see if, they work for them. I think that would be the better call, so maybe, we're talking about lawyers at the end of the last section. Maybe this is one of those things inside the FBI. The lawyers are saying, no, we shouldn't do that because of X, Y, Z. They got the information from, as I understand, an ally, so maybe they can't. But if you're going to give them out to anybody that asks, why not just post them all online?
Right. Speaking of where they got the keys, as I understand it, they got it from our British friends. So maybe they posted it already. So maybe we just got to go look for a different website. I don't know. Mitch, thoughts?
I feel like I'm, as I said earlier, I'm traveling a lot. I feel like I'm at the airport. Will the passenger who left their keys at the TSA checkpoint please return and pick up your keys? It kind of seems like that. I don't know. I found this story really interesting. Like, come and get your keys. You lost your keys. Well, if they have them, who else? And they got them from Lockbit. Well, who else has them too, right? So that's my concern is, shouldn't you have replaced those keys by now? Or maybe this is like ransomware and you're trying to get your stuff back or something. It didn't quite connect to me. So maybe one of you can explain it, but I don't quite get why you would want your keys back. You should have replaced them by now.
Well, yeah, it's the shared responsibility thing we were talking about in the last segment, right? This is why at the end of the day, your comment, Mitch, is right. Yeah, at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own security, and always will be. Right? And as we start talking about really sharing the responsibility, then you need to be able to connect all the dots. I mean, how can you really take responsibility when you really don't know? Because, most people won't even hear about this story. There's a lot of news. This is one, for example, I may have been somebody who got the ransomware, but I didn't hear about the story. So I don't even know the FBI has, may have the keys. So I don't even know that. And if we're really going to try, on a, serious level, a corporate level, a national security level, to really put together systems that are fast enough, that we get works through this shared responsibility model. It can't be that you hope you may have seen a reel where somebody mentioned a headline and found out that there's a website that you can ask to get your keys back from the FBI.
So, again, I'm a simple guy, but it is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So can they not figure out whose keys these are and give them to them?
I don't know. I mean, so you think this through. If the UK got them from, the bad guys, then they might not have gotten the data, to tie those directly back to where they're from. Though, of course, the bad guys would have that data. That's the whole point. Most of having the keys, unless, who they go with, so you can, blackmail people to get them back. But, to your question, if they did, I think, they should just contact them. Why not?
I guess you live in this space, Chris. So it feels like the public-private partnership around cybersecurity is, shall we say, not well defined. So what's going on in this conversation out there? I know you talk to these guys in Washington. I mean, what's your sense of where are we and what needs to be done here to make this kind of just take the friction out of it?
I think we need to keep talking, keep trying, right? The public and private is always different. We pay taxes, they spend taxes. That's, it doesn't matter where you start on your thought process, ideological spectrum and whatnot. But, the government, just like companies, just made of people who just do things, for a living. And, my experience, they tend to be just like in the private sector, they tend to be decent people doing the best they can. But there's, we were talking about lawyers, and it's lawyers act when they get to extremes, but we have lots of action before those, lots of impact before those extremes. People don't like, getting into situations that may lead to a lawyer someday. And, so whether I'm an employee at the FBI and say, how do I handle this? Got to make a call and take the safe bet. So we have all that friction anyways. And as I've said here, and I've said frequently, some of this stuff just takes a long, long time. You shouldn't be surprised. It literally takes a decade or more to build one aircraft carrier. How long does it take to build one Department of Cyber with a Secretary of Cyber and everything else? 30, 40, 50 years. These things don't happen overnight. And I think, I gave a talk to, on Wednesday of last week to a group, in the Beltway and the intelligence community and so forth, looking at information integrity. And my recommendation there, I think, is the answer to your question, is lean into what our strength is. Our strength is openness and transparency and democracy and freedom of speech and open source and all these good things. And I encourage in the corporate world all the time. We sort of touched on that in the last segment, but do the right thing as a corporation. Ironically, you'll just make more money, right? Because people like dealing with companies that do the right thing. And as government agencies and employees, work towards transparency, right? There's rules. You can basically back up any action you take inside the government because you live inside nothing but a policy environment. Just being take every opportunity you can to be extremely transparent, build why you did what basis that was on. So there's just less mistrust.
We talked about responsibility last segment, and it does seem to me that we've been dealing with this whole ransomware and encryption stuff for, better part of a decade, it feels like. And yet we still have these issues and we're not resilient enough. I mean, at this point, are the bad guys doing things that are, changing tactics and evolving in ways that we can't handle? Or is it just kind of getting to the point where it's simple negligence?
Well, I think it's more than just kind of security policies and filling out questionnaires, getting information from our suppliers about the security and the certifications or testing that they've had and passed. There's other dynamics that come to play. So, for example, in the healthcare industry, where literally lives are on the line in many cases, if they've been attacked, ransomwared, they're not able to operate. It's one thing is somebody's money's locked up and you might have a financial loss. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not significant. It's different if, if people laying on the operating table, not to be too dramatic, but you have people's lives. And so there is in the, hacking world and in the bad guy world, if you will, they know that hospitals will pay the ransom. Healthcare entities will pay that because they can't wait. They can't wait to come back and kind of deal with it, have somebody go negotiate with them. They'll just get over it. So there are places where it's not that people are more vulnerable, but they're more susceptible to the financial outcome that the bad guys are looking for. So you kind of have to look at it systemically, Mike, because it's multiple factors, not just, some are better at protecting themselves from ransomware. That's true, but it's more than that.
All right. Chris, you got any thoughts here on what is the definition of, I'm a victim versus I just kind of simply negligent?
Well, I think when we're in a happy place, that most of this is simply negligence. Right? The same reason, the office, with all these stories we read about, building contractor negligence happens. Now, if it happens 90% of the time, then no buildings stand up. If it happens 0% of the time, your control is probably too tight. So as long as our problems tend to mostly be negligence, and I think they kind of are, right? As we discussed earlier, as much as we can spread the responsibility and lots of parties, bear responsibility when anything happens, were you driving the car? I was driving the car. It's like, yeah, I can understand how this happened. Happens all the time, but you get the ticket, you have the responsibility because, yes, you could have taken the time and so as long as the incompetence level, accounts for most of these problems and is not, stopping everything, then it's not systemic. But to Mitch's point, yeah, there are a lot of systemic issues. And, as I concern myself about this stuff, I don't like seeing any of them stuck for a long time. You see 5, 10, 15 years go by and a problem is still a problem. It's either acceptable or we're missing something. And we usually are. And that's when, Mike, your cynicism is really well pointed. We need that. Someone say, that's a problem right there. And make people fix it.
So who's responsible for this, Mitch? And I'll use that car metaphor. If I take my car and I drive it to a disreputable part of town and I leave the windows down and the keys in the ignition and the car gets stolen, well, it's still a crime. It should not have been stolen, but I'd be kind of stupid, wouldn't I?
It's kind of back to the Snowflake example, right? Same kind of thing of, is it the manager that hired somebody that didn't know what they were doing that was supposed to be, performing security function at the organization who didn't know, or didn't kind of have the influence to be able to say, we really need to set up 2-factor authentication ourselves or whatever it might be. It's a mix, right? On the other hand, if the manufacturer's handing you a car and, it basically has problems with it, that safety issues with it, guess what? They have to recall it. They have to do something about that. Right? When enough people have reported that as an issue. So it also happens where, the providers aren't always going to get it right either. So they have to be responsible and say, hey, you know what? It's time. We had to take these measures. We learned something from this breach, or we discovered something. We have to do better in our security, or we're beefing this up. We're changing our APIs. I've had that happen a lot in the last 2 years of people saying, we're not really comfortable handing you a key anymore or a token to use the API anymore. We're going to have you go through this interface, and then for each application you get, whatever it is, certificate or maybe a token or a gateway to go through to have better security. And that's what we have to do. We all have to upgrade our security, whether you're in the service provider world or you're in the application development world or you're in the security organization, the CISO at your company.
Chris, back to the shared responsibility thing. I feel like we're trying to blame too much of the security folks for aberrant behavior that really belongs to the end user sometimes, and probably more often where it's the end user who didn't do something or didn't follow a policy, and yet we're trying to hold the security people accountable for the end users. I guess, we're entering a political season, and I'm kind of like, who should we be locking up here?
I like responsibility. I think it's liberating, right? It's nice to know, okay, I'm responsible for that, right? And it's, I think that's, but again, shared responsibility requires ability to figure out what you're responsible for, right? And in the case of taking a security job, let's just, focus on all us people who work in security. You took the job, right? And I agree with Mitch, you said a second ago, someone hired you. Now, did they hire the wrong person? Did they not resource you? Maybe. However, you took the job. Right. So I'm willing to, and security folks are some of the best people in the world, frankly. Right. And they can take it. Every one of us knows you took the job. I did the thing. I knew they weren't going to pay me enough. I knew they weren't going to give me the authority. I could have not taken the job. Now, maybe you need the money. Anyway, we all make choices. Responsibility has to start with the individual. And, if this, at the end of the day, it's the board in a corporate environment. That's it. That's where the responsibility really is. They didn't empower or instruct or whatnot the CEO. And then the CEO, from an operations perspective, they're responsible, period, done. However, don't take the bloody job if you can't get the work done, because we all own a slice of it.
All right. You heard it here, folks. The other side of responsibility is called accountability, and we all have to answer for it at the end of the day. We'll be back in a minute to get into our next topic, but it's just going to be more and more chaos. Here we are.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research.
All right, welcome back for our third block of insanity. So, we have had an acquisition in the security space. Fortinet has acquired Lacework. Lacework is a provider of what's known as a cloud-native application protection platform, a CNAPP. And maybe I get this wrong, but I'll let Mitch clarify. But it seemed to be the whole point of these CNAPPs was to roll up all these tools so that I could reduce my friction and my costs, so that way I could standardize on a common platform. And we were supposed to roll up everything through the CNAPP. But now it turns out the CNAPP providers are being acquired by other people. So who's rolling up who here and for what purposes? Mitch, what do you think?
Well, CNAPPs specifically to support more cloud-native architecture, right? Microservices, API first kinds of applications. Where they're using, obviously probably using containers, probably using Kubernetes, but don't not necessarily have to be. And it's really providing you, just speaking generically about CNAPP, providing you things like API discovery, API gateways, authentication, identity management for machine-to-machine identities, things like that. So you don't want every application going off and inventing its own, machine-to-machine identity mechanism, just like you wouldn't every department go create their own person identity, IAM solution. So the idea is to pull that together, because guess what? Every app needs that. What's interesting about Fortinet is, Fortinet's pretty easy to view them as a traditional security vendor, security provider. They've been around a long time. They're in the SIM world, doing SOAR, XDR, things like that. Thing that traditional security people would, that's what I know them for. And now with this acquisition with Lacework, really helps them step into the software architecture of security world. I think it's a smart purchase from that standpoint. I'm not sure everybody living in the security world yet knows kind of cloud native and what all that means, but I'll bet they're dealing with it somewhere in their organization. They need to kind of help make that transition. I got to believe Fortinet's looking at it as, we can help you get there. We know how the CNAP solution.
Chris, I don't know if you have a thought on the actual deal, but it does seem to shine a light on this whole tool sprawl issue within cybersecurity. And frankly, I sometimes think all these tools are resulting in us working at cross purposes. But I don't know, do we have too many tools or not enough tools or just not the right tools?
Well, to sound like a broken record in many ways, if you have too many tools, you can't find them. And literally have tools here at the right tools on hand. And there's also the tools that get built into things, so I don't have to deal with the tools myself anymore. But I think this one is interesting. I see Fortinet in the role of John Deere, right? John Deere, just very recently, suddenly has more software than hardware engineers, right? And they make physical tractors and these sort of things. And I know I'm going to get immediately pinged by my Fortinet friends, but Fortinet, sells cheap now, right? Flying is the firewalls and yes, other things. But I think Mitch, you put it better than I'm about to. But they're more that traditional play, and cloud native, and the opt to use AI. What does it even mean? How do we bolt all these things together? So whether this individual deal, this merger, works out well, we'll see. But I think this bolting the traditional, network providers, the infrastructure providers, the hardware providers, the security infrastructure providers, into players like Lacework seems like the direction we're going.
And, Chris, I was thinking about it some more based on what you said. And I mean this in a positive way. Fortinet is kind of a modern day belt and suspenders, right? This is SASE and web application firewall and bot protection and cloud native firewalls, all that kind of stuff. So it's, they're in the modern world of what we think is a security protection. And I think with Lacework, it kind of gets them into the software architecture side of this, and what really happens inside of those applications is because they look like a network. They just talk to each other over APIs, and it might be on the same cluster. They may not be. It could be fully distributed. So it is a logical step. Then I think, we're in the acquisition era, right? Cisco buys Splunk, roll up these days. And so I think we'll see more of this kind of activity.
Yeah, I think to your point, Mitch, what we're seeing is all these tools are becoming features of a larger platform. And ultimately, I think there's pressure to reduce the cost of cybersecurity, because otherwise you got to integrate all these tools, and then you're basically giving yourself whiplash as you swivel from tool to tool to tool to try to figure out what's going on in the environment. And each tool is telling you something different at a different point in time. So I don't know, Chris, I mean, have we just gotten so tool happy that, we're kind of becoming our own worst enemies?
Yeah, I guess it's probably the risk. I literally love tools, right? I'm always sorting them and using them and categorizing them. And we were talking before in the green room before this, I pulled out a bunch of gear and hardware and associated tools from 25 years ago. But they haven't taken any of my time. To your point, Mike, I haven't messed with them, but I keep them on hand. They're available. But so as enthusiasts, we do this a lot, and I think again, we continue to build things in, security products and services that were a good idea, that were structurally significant, get built in. And some go away because we stop doing things the way that, ended up needing to have that security feature in the first place. A lot of security is compensating controls. It's like, what we should do is ABC, but we're not going to do that. So instead, we'll create this market segment and we'll stick this thing in there. And, if you're the vendor, then you can make money, or if you're the consumer, you can solve that issue until it gets fixed. And then that, so there shouldn't be there's not an infinite number of tools. Those are actual screwdrivers, right? Some tools are just always tools. Other tools are fads and fade away over time.
Yeah. Mitch, we have this notion in the land of DevOps called platform engineering, right? We're trying to figure out how to run processes at scale. Do we need to have platform engineering extended out to cybersecurity? And do we call it platform security engineering? I don't know, but.
Well, the function of platform engineering versus platforms, right? Kind of two interconnected topics. Platform engineering can be more about the setting up of standard environments, whether they be security, right? I mean, yeah, there's security patterns and templates and things that we can do. And matter of fact, a lot of platform engineering groups are about improving the security of the images, the base images that they're constructing their templates and their configurations out of. It's also about how to keep that up to date. I think the other side of platform, though, is whether you're one company acquiring company B, C, D, E, and F, you don't want to be, like this loose collection of, we're just making it easier to order off one price sheet. And that's kind of what our integration strategy is. That's not so helpful as it is in today's world. You have to be able to see data across all of these tools and then understand the context of it, so you know action to take. And there may be workflow that crosses all that. And I think in a security context, that is what a platform is about. So when someone acquires another company, there are integrations that they can make. That's all good. But what about the data layer? Think about thinking about having the data platform across all of those security tools that they're providing you, or plugging into other things like observability platforms and OTel and things like that. In today's world, things happen too fast to do very much manually, at least keep pace with what's happening manually. And we can not only automate, but we can make our lives easier to get access and understand and then use data across security domains and tools, and by the way, application security, right? Cloud security provider, all that stuff. I think that's the key to keeping pace, at least.
Chris, the part of this that makes my head explode, there's many things that do lately, but we've been saying that there's a shortage of security professionals forever and ever and ever. So who's using all these tools? But we don't have enough people to give the tools to. So who's figuring out how to use all these tools?
The issue of shelfware is a thing, right? A lot of things get bought. As a vendor, you're running into this. I'm really happy someone bought my thing, and then it's like, oh, I'm willing to find out what you did with it without nothing, right? So that's the actual thing, right? I mean, as I opined a minute ago, I think we got to be careful because we're enthusiastic about technology and we're going to do this stuff for a living. Don't acquire more tools and more things you can actually bloody use. Use the ones you have as much to their most best effect, and keep digging back up the old tools. A lot of times new problems actually work well with existing techniques. So I think it's there's certain serious that's an intrinsic risk of creep. I don't know. I don't think we're any worse. Well, yes, we are worse now than we have been because we have more choices. But I don't think the problem is much worse than it always has been. It's not about how many tools we have or how many people we have. It's are we doing this effectively and for the right reasons with the right authorities? And that hasn't gotten a whole lot better.
I don't know. Mitch, I can get a little paranoid sometimes, but have we allowed a cybersecurity industrial complex to evolve here where there's just this massive amount of money and infrastructure all chasing, all these threats without actually maybe solving the problem?
I feel like it just watched post-World War II, President Eisenhower. We must be careful of the military-industrial complex. It's easy. Let me say it this way: it's easy to become have a mindset where we think the tool is the solution. And how many times do you maybe walk into somebody's garage and they got a wall full of tools, and you say, "Let's go work on this." They grab 3 things that they take out to go work on something. Start with that. There's like a core of 30 things that I need to do. 80% of the jobs and all the other stuff are sort of those fancy situations, or maybe the shelfware, or maybe I use them too. It's kind of the same thing in security, right? I mean, we moved from a checkbox mentality of network security. Well, okay, I got my firewall, I got my intrusion prevention, I got my web application firewall, I got my my data protection, whatever it might be. So I've got every one of those pizza boxes in the rack, so I'm good, right? And I'm being oversimplistic, of course. But you can't take that sort of checkbox mentality, because what it's all about today is operations. It's all about the SOC. It's all about the security incident teams and how they respond. And of course, compliance and having data to verify. You say you're doing this, and how can you demonstrate that you are? So it's a complex world. So I think you're better off to use fewer tools really well than a lot of tools not very well. I can be general about it. I mean, hopefully that's more than common sense, but sometimes common sense isn't too common.
This is true. Chris, what's your take on AI? And I'm asking this question because is that not an opportunity to kind of flatten this whole infrastructure, and maybe we'll have a common data pool that we're running algorithms against, and we can have a common view of the events? I mean, are we on the cusp of maybe changing this because AI will force the issue, or is that just one more tool added to the pack and it is what it is?
You know, the fact that you of all people would ask that question right now makes me think that maybe we kind of are, right? You know, I'm very hesitant to wax too poetic about all the promises of AI in the short term, because it seems everybody's doing that, and it kind of seems true, right? You know, all of we're talking about, you know, time to visit, you know, time to transparency in sort of each of these segments today on the show. And, you know, the reality is if you have to have a staff of 10, 12, 10,000, 12,000, you know, people reading things to actually get, you know, far enough along in time to achieve some goal, you're not going to do that, or almost never going to do that. That's the kind of stuff this large language model, you know, wave of technology is bringing. And just in the security space, yeah, whether I can just looking at supply chain, just being able to put all the pieces together in time to do something about it, not post catastrophe, not, you know, in some catastrophic, you know, year and a half in the courtroom with boxes of records time, but like right now, how do we put all of this stuff together? What we are calling AI right now has amazing potential in that space, right? And both sides, you know, studies, you know, already on the negative, you know, the negative security effect of AI, you know, AI, the same tools in the hands of people, you know, you're not in favor of. I think this is an advantage of vendors, because we have the ability to put things together, put visibility together, to put situational awareness together so much faster in ways that aren't really revolutionary than we would just do if we just had a lot of people. But you don't need a lot of people.
There you go. Hey, folks, we're coming to the end of the show, but I think the definition of insanity is banging your head against the wall and expecting a different outcome. And, well, welcome to cybersecurity. So I'm hoping things get better, but right now, I got to say, from the outside, it doesn't look too good.
Just wear a helmet, Mike. Wear a helmet.
All right. Anyway, thanks, everybody, for watching the latest episode. The rest of the Techstrong TV lineup is coming up right behind us. By all means, stay tuned, and thanks for watching.